They say money can buy anything: comfort, friends, even loyalty. But when the true test of life comes, when your heart is beating against time, when death is staring at you so closely that every second feels like your last, it is never money that saves you. It is humanity. And that's exactly what happened one stormy night, when the millionaire's only son was crushed under the weight of his own fortune. Literally pinned beneath his shining, luxurious truck. Dozens of people walked past, whispering, staring. But no one dared to help. His cries echoed in the dark streets, muffled by the rain. And just when hope had left him, when he thought he would die alone under the very machine that symbolized his privilege, help came from the most unexpected place. A poor maid, carrying her fragile baby in her arms. What happened that night not only saved a life, but also changed two families forever. The city was alive with neon lights and honking cars, yet in the grand mansion that stood like a palace on the hill, loneliness was the loudest sound. Inside lived Ethan, the only son of wealthy businessman Charles Donovan. Ethan had everything a young man could dream of: the latest sports cars, an overflowing wardrobe of designer suits, and an endless credit card that could bend reality in his favor. But what he lacked, what money could never buy, was sincerity. Friends surrounded him, yet they were hollow, showing up only when he was paying. People admired him, but only for his father's power. Even within his own home, the air was cold. His father, always traveling for deals, spoke more to his phone than to his son, while his late mother's absence still haunted the long hallways. Ethan's wealth had made him untouchable. And in that untouchability, he had grown reckless. He drove too fast, drank too much, and lived as though life owed him eternity. On the night it all happened, he stormed out of a party after an argument with one of his fake friends. Rain poured from the heavens, drenching the city streets, but Ethan, stubborn and wild, refused to wait. He jumped into his massive black truck, its engine roaring like a beast breaking free from chains. The roads were slick, but his pride was slipperier. He pressed harder on the accelerator, speeding down an empty stretch, when suddenly, a sharp curve betrayed him. The truck swerved, tires skidding. Ethan tried to correct it, but the rain mocked his grip. In a heartbeat, the world flipped. The truck tumbled onto its side with a violent crash, glass shattering, metal groaning, and his body thrown like a rag doll against the steering wheel. Pain exploded through his chest. When the chaos settled, Ethan found himself trapped. His legs pinned beneath the truck's twisted frame. His phone had been thrown out of reach, and his voice cracked as he screamed for help. The city wasn't far, but where he was stranded, people passed like shadows. Pedestrians slowed down, shocked by the sight of a millionaire's son crushed under his own truck. They whispered, shook their heads, and kept walking. Some pulled out their phones, not to call for help, but to record, hoping for viral fame. Ethan's screams pierced the night, desperate and raw, but no one came forward. His entire life, people had obeyed him for his name, but now when he needed them most, his wealth meant nothing. Minutes turned into eternity. Rain seeped into his skin, his breaths came shallow, and fear clutched his chest. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt powerless, disposable. Abandoned by the very world that pretended to worship him. Just when darkness began to swallow his hope, footsteps approached. Not hurried, not fearful, but steady and determined. He turned his head weakly, expecting another bystander. What he saw instead shook him to the core. A young woman, drenched in the rain, carrying a fragile baby wrapped in a worn blanket, stood staring at the wreck. Her clothes were simple, the kind worn by housemaids who worked in wealthy homes. Her eyes carried exhaustion but also a strange fire of determination. Unlike the others, she didn't hesitate. She shifted her baby to one arm, knelt down, and tried to wedge her free hand beneath the metal. The sight was almost absurd. A frail maid and her infant child against the crushing weight of a truck. Yet in that moment, Ethan realized she was the only one willing to fight for his life. 2. Chapter 2. The maid's strength. Her name was Rosa. She worked as a maid in a neighborhood not far from where Ethan's truck had crashed. Her life was a stark opposite to his. While he drowned in excess, she barely survived on crumbs. Widowed young, Rosa was left to raise her baby, Sophia, alone. Every day was a battle. Scrubbing floors until her hands bled, washing dishes until her back ached. Walking home in the cold night because she couldn't afford the bus fare. And yet, Rosa carried her pain with quiet dignity. She never complained, never cursed fate, because for her, survival was not a choice. It was a promise she made to her daughter. That night, as she hurried home from her second job, the cries from under the truck reached her ears. At first, fear clawed at her. She was just one woman, frail and tired, with a baby in her arms. How could she possibly help? But then she looked at Sophia's tiny sleeping face. What kind of world was she raising her daughter in? If people could walk past suffering without lifting a hand. With that thought, Rosa made her decision. She laid her baby carefully on a dry patch of cloth under a tree, shielding her with her shawl. Then, with trembling hands and soaked clothes, Rosa returned to the wreck. Ethan stared at her in disbelief, his eyes wide with both shame and hope. "Help me," he gasped, voice breaking. Rosa planted her feet in the mud, pressed her shoulder against the cold steel, and pushed with every ounce of strength in her body. The truck didn't budge. She gritted her teeth, tears mixing with rain, her muscles screaming. Again, she pushed, her voice breaking into cries of pain. Ethan, watching this poor maid fight harder for his life than anyone ever had, felt something break inside him. For the first time, he saw what real courage looked like. Not the false bravery of reckless parties, but the raw strength of someone who had nothing yet gave everything. Finally, Rosa managed to wedge a broken branch under the truck, using it as leverage. Inch by inch, with pure willpower, she created just enough space for Ethan to drag his crushed legs free. His body collapsed into the mud, shaking from pain but alive. Rosa, panting heavily, grabbed him by the arm and pulled with all her might, dragging him away from the wreck. Once they were a safe distance, she collapsed beside him, chest heaving, rain washing their faces. Ethan looked at her, the maid with her fragile baby sleeping nearby, and tears welled in his eyes. For a man who thought money ruled the world, it was a brutal lesson, that compassion, sacrifice, and humanity came from places where gold could never reach. He whispered, "You saved me." Rosa, exhausted but steady, replied softly, "I only did what anyone should have done." She looked at the people still standing at a distance, recording with their phones, unwilling to help. Her voice hardened. But not everyone remembers what it means to be human. That night, as the ambulance finally arrived, Ethan's life took a turn he never imagined. His injuries would heal, but the scar left by Rosa's courage would remain forever. He promised himself he would not waste this second chance. For the first time, Ethan wanted to be more than a millionaire's son. He wanted to be someone worth saving. And Rosa. She went home with her baby, unnoticed, unthanked by the crowd, but carrying with her the quiet knowledge that she had done something extraordinary. Little did she know, her act of bravery would soon change her destiny too, because Ethan Donovan's story was only beginning, and so was hers. When the world turns its back, it is not wealth, power, or status that saves us. It is humanity. True strength lies not in what we own, but in what we give.